with insurgency movements, and as they reach down deep inside and do the really hard things, they also extract an emotional and psychological toll on an enemy.
The Germans became increasingly brutal because they were so afraid of the Cretans. They saw Cretans behind every rock, every stone.
There was a funeral procession from Agios Mamas and Agios Yannis on the way to bury two that were executed by the Germans the previous day. They had a permit to go to the mountain, which they needed because it was a restricted area. A small squad of Germans came across the burial site during the funeral. The one who had the burial permit moved towards the Germans to show it to them. But as soon as the Germans realized they were outnumbered, they saw the freshly covered graves, and they got scared, and they shot everyone, including the priest. I remember seeing him lying there next to the grave, dead, and the Gospel and the Bible lying right next to him.
I was a witness at the execution in Imera. They were all my friends. They were the cream of the crop. There was the banker, the treasurer, the mayor. The Germans had them dig a pit and tie them to a post in the center of it. And the teacher, who was the psalter for the church, started chanting hymns. He chanted the memorial services. He knew it by heart. Then he started singing our national anthem. And then the order was given to shoot.
In the case of Crete, there was this mythological proportion to what they did, but that doesn't do nearly as much justice as it does when the defeated forces themselves acknowledge the determination, the iron will of the people involved. The then commander of the German forces in Crete, General Alexander André, spoke about what he felt and what he saw as he witnessed this extraordinary show of determination, this quest for liberty that led the Cretans to sacrifice themselves. What Alexander André said, I think, is the most poignant of all. The courage of Cretans facing the firing squad is legendary. Cretans turn to mythical figures. They are so proud during their tragic moment of death that one can hardly fail to admire their courage. When executions were to take place, I would leave my desk and walk out to the balcony just to watch and admire those proud people. Nowhere else have I witnessed such defiance to death, such love for freedom, than on Crete.
German reprisals and executions only brutalized the population and encouraged them to commit more acts of resistance, creating a fertile ground for the SOE to supply weapons, grenades, mines, etc., to help the Cretan resistance expand dramatically.
Lee Fermer and the other relatively few SOE operatives who were in Crete were just as dedicated to the notion of freedom for Crete as the Cretans themselves were.
There were only half a dozen officers at the most, and with their wireless sets and their operators. In a way, it was a terrific hardship. There wasn't much to eat, and they never let us go short.
We were very, very close. We were living together, eating the same food. They became one with us, dressing like us. Many of them could speak very good Greek. And we had a very, very close organization. They were receiving the messages through wireless services from Cairo, and we had messengers that would take the messages throughout the Crete.
We had very important information sent to Cairo, including information about convoys. The farmer would look at it and transfer it onto code, and he had the wireless operator and he would transmit them. One time I was searched because the Germans knew where the wireless was. I went through that direction and they suspected that I had something on me. And I had maps and drawings and information into the umbrella, my umbrella. And I left the umbrella down and they searched me. They checked my shoes, and then I picked up the umbrella and I walked away.
We were in constant communication. We were in different caves, but we used to meet every month or so and confer. And the extraordinary thing was, although we were in touch with headquarters, which is in Ruston Buildings in Cairo, we were left very free to do what we want.
The farmer was a very enthusiastic person. He really was an amazing character. I always admired them for his courage, and I tried to imitate them. He would stop the Germans to ask for light for his cigarette. In the meantime, he would pick up the chair to see what the insignias they had, where they belonged, even ask them questions sometimes.
The amazing thing about these British intelligence officers was they had the joy of living in them. We fought together, we lived together, and we died together.
One day, Lee Fermor and I were sitting together, having some coffee, and a group of Germans came up to us. They were looking for men to work on a forced labor project. They captured Fermor and took him to the airfield to work all day. He came back later that evening and said, "I saw and learned everything. I have never met another character as strong as him, neither Greek or English."
The first order of business for the German paratroopers in Operation Mercury was to seize three vitally important airfields, Castells, Valmy, and Heraklion, because they had to be able to supply themselves as they occupied Crete, and it was absolutely vital that the SOE operatives enlist the support of the resistance fighters to take those airfields back.
The saboteurs went and placed the bombs, which they had made plastic bombs onto the planes and onto the gasoline. And then a German came towards me and I gave signals with a flashlight and the saboteurs came. And we ran probably like, a third of a mile or so, and then we stopped. And by that time, the explosion started and barrels of gasoline thrown up in the air and exploded. It was beautiful.
Acts of sabotage and espionage, of course, were the primary focus of the resistance and the SOE activities in Crete. However, they could not avoid direct confrontation with the German units on the ground, and occasionally there were firefights between the Germans and Cretan guerrillas.
It was Friday the 13th, August the 13th, 1943. We received Holy Communion. We got up always early in the morning, and one of the adartes, George Balaskas, told us, "I had a dream, and before the sunrise, some very bad things going to happen to us." So about that time, the night guard, whose name is Psarokostas, arrived and told us the village of Oriza is surrounded.
There was a little road that they would go through Trahili, then go to Luva. We could see the Germans going up there from down in the village. The Germans were going up there like a rope.
It was almost daylight. We looked up to the mountain, and sure enough, we saw the top of the mountain, Germans walking back and forth. And at that time, the Germans fired in the air a machine gun. A warning. Balaskas saw the man with the machine gun. With one shot, Balaska killed him. As I was dashing forward, Selekos ran and tell us, I'm wounded. And he collapsed. He just turned his head and expired. Petrakogiorgis raised his rifle and he said, "Apano done palikaria mu, thanatos si varvarus," which means, on them, death to the barbarians. And we attacked them from all directions. They hit this high ground. They should have killed every one of us. The Germans were about 400, but because of the command that Petrakogiorgis gave, we just, like wild animals, attacked them. At that time, we pushed all directions, to the right, to the left, and forward.
I saw a German to my right and began to shoot. He tried to hide, and I aimed and I shot him and he fell. Then I went up to him and shot him again to make sure he was dead, and he was. The Germans were confused in the mountains. The Germans in the mountains were nothing.
I remember, see one German, he threw his backpack and his gun and running like a wild goat. Although we were only 18, they had no idea how many we were. I have the feeling that they thought behind every tree was a gorilla.
The Germans held every advantage. They had the high ground. They should have been able to destroy the small Cretan band, but the reverse happened. The Cretans managed to put over 400 German troops to flight. The resistance in Crete grew rapidly, much more rapidly than the Germans had anticipated. The German High Command placed the blame of having such a growing resistance against the commandant, General Andre, who was relieved. He was replaced by General Müller, who was notorious as a very heavy-handed man who imposed a great deal of brutality on the island during his tenure as commandant.
He had killed many, many people all over in Crete, burned a lot of villages, and he created a fear during that time, in 1943.
They destroyed my village. Nothing had escaped that day. They used gasoline and set everything on fire. The houses, the people, and one person who was handicapped, he was burned alive inside his house.
They killed 6 kids from a village called Arkadi. The youngest was 12, the oldest 18. They had executed them. 6 kids. 2 were brothers. My sister's youngster, who was 9 years old, was machine gunned by the Germans. Is that not a terrible thing? My sister's child?
They killed anyone they caught. They had even placed mines in the village square. They destroyed everything. We gathered the bodies and put them in tents by the river. We counted 10 groups of tents. A total of 108 were executed that day. You can't begin to imagine what happened. Such gruesome things. The human mind cannot grasp the disaster that happened there.
I was there in the village of Margaritari with Petrakogiorgis to pick up supplies. The Germans surrounded the village and we had not realized what had happened. I ran down the ravine. I saw 2 or 3 Germans raising their machine guns toward me. I got scared and I raised my hands. They took me and other prisoners to a warehouse in Mirrors. The Germans started interrogating us.
Schubert came and had me searched and found scissors on me that belonged to a doctor. They cut my fingers so that I would talk and give information. Where is Petrakogiorgi and where are the others? They would ask. We're going to let your blood run until you talk. One person had a revolver at my chest, and after a while he started hitting me on the head with the butt of the gun. I did not open my mouth. They learned nothing from me.
I knew that if the Gestapo tortured me, I may not have been able to resist. I knew all the activities that were taking place for almost everybody in the group, where all the radios were hidden and who was giving us supplies, everything. I knew all those people were depending upon me. For me, it would have been easier to die instead of destroying and betraying my people and living the rest of my life as a despicable traitor. That is why I see this as the most important event in my life, that I was able to remain silent.
Because of the fear and destruction that Mueller had created in Crete, it was very, very difficult for us to receive supplies, ammunitions, and especially food. Fortunately, we had arranged to receive a drop with the Americans, the CIA, which at that time was OSS.
By 1943, the OSS had been up and running for a year, and as such had been able to join their SOE counterparts in establishing a base of operations in Cairo. One of the first major acts of the OSS was to provide substantial airdrop of supplies, equipment, clothing, medical materials, certainly ammunition, to Petra Koyorgis, who was right at the final straw of being able to continue the fight.
Our leader, along with 6 or 7 men, returned from the Middle East, wearing uniforms that belonged to the American army. We found out the Americans were about to drop supplies on Mount Siloritis, on a hilltop called Agathites. We had agreed to make some signals using wood. We were going to start a fire so that the airplane would recognize the exact location. The airplane took a dip and dropped 17 parachutes, came down again and dropped 17 more. The American drop of supplies was extremely important. We were absolutely thrilled. I can still feel it today. That's how important the American resupply was to us.
There are all sorts of wonderful photographs of the Cretan resistance after that, and they are all dressed in the wonderful Eisenhower jackets and the other clothing that was characteristic of the OSS at that time.
Those parachutes had everything that we needed: guns, ammunition, clothes, food, but most of all, they really boosted our morale. And from that time on, things completely changed.
1943 was a critical year for the Cretan resistance. The Americans enabled them to rearm, reorganize, and begin some very serious attacks against the Germans, including the very famous attack by Banduvas in September of 1943.
After that, the Germans, with the direction of Mueller, sent a big number of Germans to Viano. This animal, Mueller, destroyed Viano, the total area, destroyed all the villages, and killed hundreds of people.
And the whole place was sort of pillar and smoke, part of Crete. It was a horrifying Holocaust. And we wondered what to do. I'd had the idea that we might take the German general, waylay the German general, and take him prisoner. And it'll be a terrific smack in the eye for the Germans, their morale and everything. And the thing was that it should be a sort of Anglo-Cretan thing, not a sort of all entirely English, organized from outside, but as a kind of